seen about Antifa, I'm sure. So let's travel back to 1966, August of 1966. Group of students, youths, formed a social organization to use violence and intimidation to promote communism. This is back in the 1960s. I was 3 years old in 1966. Some of us can remember parts of the 1960s, some of us can't, but I think everybody's familiar with what went on in the 1960s. So you had this movement, and they started with intimidation, and then they went on to vandalizing property and even attacking people personally. One of the things they did was they tore down monuments. They desecrated cemeteries. They pushed for the change of place names, especially street names. Wow. Sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? 1966. Oh, that wasn't in the United States. That was in Red China. Red China, August of 1966, there was something called the Cultural Revolution. Mao Zedong, who brought communism to Red China in 1949. Things were not going well. China was not a worker's paradise. Imagine that. So he blamed it on something he called the four olds. Old culture, old ideas, old habits, and old politics. So he wanted to replace those four olds with communism. He formed these gangs of youths to go around and literally attack symbols and people who were part of the olds and replace them with communism to boost the communist revolution. It's called a cultural revolution. It was not covered very much in Western media, largely because Mao Zedong, he was the #1 mass murderer of the 20th century. He killed 70 million people, either directly through assassination, execution, or forced starvation, you name it. He killed more people than Hitler, Stalin, and Pol Pot combined. So the Cultural Revolution in 1966, with these Red Guards, only killed about 10,000 people. So for Mao Zedong, that was a drop in the bucket, right? So people kind of forget that. But we have reason to go back and visit that. Did you know there's an Antifa chapter in Austin, Texas? Do you know what they call themselves? The Red Guards. In law enforcement, they refer to that as a clue. And that's what Antifa's goal is, to overthrow the Constitution of the United States.
Yeah.
Now, we look at that and we think, well, that's ridiculous, they'll never be successful. But think about how far they've come.
Right. Right.
When you look at the fact that the Democrat Party, in particular, has a very paternal view towards Antifa, you realize this is a problem. And folks in this room are going to be on the front line of pushing back against Antifa, because it's not going to happen in Washington, D.C., no matter who ends up in the White House in 2021. If it's President Trump, his current FBI director already is clueless about Antifa. I think willfully clueless. He's one of the guys that's saying they're just an idea. I can tell you, they're not just an idea. As Trump says, ideas don't hit you in the head with a brick.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just the FBI director. The rank and file members of the Department of Justice have resisted efforts to go after Antifa as well. So in other words, the swamp pushes back. So Trump's going to have that challenge. And even if he gets in office in 2021, we have to realize that Nancy Pelosi is still going to be in charge of the House. So it's going to be difficult to push things through the Congress to pass laws to push back against Antifa. Of course, if Biden ends up in the White House, I can't even think about what that's going to bring, because the Democrat Party has essentially looked the other way with all this violence. They've been asked over and over again to condemn Antifa violence, and they refuse to. I mean, they ask Trump about every day to condemn white supremacism, and he does, and then they still say that he doesn't. But nobody asked Joe Biden about Antifa. So I would think that Antifa is going to be emboldened under a Biden administration, or